It wasn't supposed to mean anything, Lisa. Alpha King Cassian murmured, his voice a low, gravelly scrape against the heavy silence of the royal study. He didn't look at her. He looked at the intricately carved mahogany desk, a sudden fascination with the wood grain. Lisa stared at him, the chill of the marble floor finally seeping through her velvet slippers. Not supposed to mean anything? She repeated, the words tasting like ash. With Elena? My beta? My best friend? Cassian finally met her gaze, his usually commanding amber eyes clouded with a sickening mix of guilt and defiance. A king has needs, Lisa. Needs a Luna cannot always fulfill. The finality in his tone was a physical blow. In that moment, the Luna died, and a queen began to breathe. The Frost Moon Pact territory was vast, a jagged expanse of pine forests and snow-capped peaks that demanded strength from its rulers. For 5 years, Lisa had provided that strength, reigning beside Cassian, the Alpha King. She had managed the complex trade agreements with the Southern Covens, mediated disputes between the volatile border patrols, and smiled through endless, tedious banquets. She had loved him, fiercely and quietly, believing her devotion was reciprocated, until the scent of jasmine began to linger. It wasn't a cloying, obvious perfume. It was subtle, a whisper caught on Cassian's collar when he returned from late-night council meetings. It was the scent Elena, her closest confidant and the Pact's beta female, wore like a second skin. Lisa had dismissed the first hint. They work closely together, she reasoned, pouring herself another cup of bitter chamomile tea in the solitary confines of her chambers. He relies on her tactical mind. But the scent persisted. Then came the lingering glances across the great hall, the hushed conversations that abruptly ended when Lisa entered a room, the almost imperceptible shift in Cassian's posture when Elena was near. A relaxing of his broad shoulders, a softening of his rigid jaw. The confrontation in the study hadn't been planned. Lisa had gone to discuss a brewing border skirmish with the Shadow Wolves. Instead, she had found Cassian and Elena, not in an embrace, but standing too close, a charged intimacy crackling between them that felt more intimate than any physical act. Elena had fled, her usually confident stride reduced to a hurried stumble, leaving Cassian to face the wreckage. Needs, Lisa echoed now, standing in the study. She didn't scream. Screaming was for those who still had hope. Is that what I am to you, Cassian? A checklist of duties? Cassian sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. The silver crown sat heavily on his brow. You are my Luna. You hold a respected position. You are vital to the Pact's stability. Stability, she deadpanned. Not love, not loyalty. Loyalty is a complex thing, Lisa. He countered, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. Elena understands the burden of leadership in a way that requires a different kind of support. It was a poorly veiled insult, a dismissal of her entire existence as his partner. He was the warrior king, the conqueror. She was the administrator, the diplomat. He needed someone who thrived on the adrenaline of his ambition, not someone who sought to temper it with reason. I see, Lisa said softly. She didn't demand he banish Elena. She didn't demand an apology. She understood the unspoken rules of Frost Moon. An Alpha King's word was law, his desires paramount. A Luna who couldn't hold his attention was a Luna in name only. She turned to leave. Lisa, Cassian called out, a sudden, unfamiliar note of uncertainty in his voice. Where are you going? To my chambers, she replied, not looking back. I have trade agreements to finalize. She walked down the long, drafty corridor, her steps echoing against the stone walls. She passed the portraits of past Alpha Kings, their painted eyes seeming to mock her. Weak, they whispered. Replaceable. She reached her rooms and locked the heavy oak door. Only then did her legs give out. She sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, the cold seeping into her bones. The pain wasn't a sharp stab, but a dull, spreading ache. A slow suffocation. Elena, the woman who had braided her hair before her mating ceremony. The woman who had sat by her bed when she suffered a miscarriage 3 years ago. The betrayal tasted worse than the infidelity. As dawn broke, casting long gray shadows across the room, a strange calm settled over Lisa. The tears had dried. The heartache had calcified into something hard and unyielding. She walked to the ornate silver mirror. The woman staring back looked pale, drawn, but the fragility was gone. In its place was a chilling clarity. Cassian thought he had broken her. He thought he could keep his crown, his pack, and his mistress, while she quietly managed the ledgers. He had miscalculated. The departure was not a grand spectacle. There were no packed bags in the dead of night, no dramatic farewells. Lisa simply began to untangle herself from Frostmoon. She meticulously finished her duties. She finalized the trade treaties with the southern covens, ensuring the pack would have sufficient grain for the coming winter. She resolved a long-standing land dispute between 2 prominent alpha families within the pack, utilizing a diplomatic finesse Cassian always found tedious. She organized the archives, leaving detailed notes for whoever would take over. She worked with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. Cassian noticed the change. He saw her at meals, her face an unreadable mask, her conversation limited to pack business. He felt her absence in their bed, a physical void he tried to fill with late nights in Elena's quarters, though he found the satisfaction fleeting. "She's acting strange," Elena commented one evening, tracing the rim of her wine glass. They were in Cassian's private chambers, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows. "Too quiet. It makes me nervous." Cassian frowned. "She's just processing. She'll come around. She knows her place." "Does she?" Elena pressed, a hint of insecurity coloring her voice. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with fiery auburn hair and a fierce, predatory grace. But she lacked Lisa's quiet authority, the natural diplomacy that commanded respect rather than demanding it. "She hasn't challenged me. She hasn't demanded a pack trial. It's unnatural. She avoids conflict," Cassian reasoned, though a sliver of doubt gnawed at him. "It's why she's a good Luna, but not a warrior. Let her be. The pack is stable." But the stability was an illusion, a thin layer of ice over a rushing river. 2 weeks after the confrontation in the study, Lisa received a missive. It bore the seal of the Ethelgard kingdom, a stylized silver dragon wrapped around a crescent moon. Ethelgard was a myth to most, a hidden ancient kingdom situated in the perilous Silver Mountains, far beyond Frostmoon's reach. They were said to be a different breed, older, stronger, holding magic that predated the shifter lineages. The letter was brief, written in elegant, flowing script. "The Queen requires an audience. Your presence is requested. A guide will meet you at the Whispering Pines." Lisa read it 3 times. Ethelgard did not summon Frostmoon Lunas. They ignored the shifter packs, viewing them as squabbling children. Why her? She didn't know, but the timing was a sign she couldn't ignore. The next morning, she attended the pack council meeting. Cassian sat at the head of the large oak table, Elena at his right hand, a position traditionally reserved for the beta. But in recent days, it felt increasingly like a usurpation of the Luna's place. Lisa sat at Cassian's left. She delivered her reports calmly. The grain silos were full, the border disputes settled, the winter preparations complete. Excellent work, Lisa. Cassian nodded, clearly relieved by her continued compliance. Is there anything else? Lisa stood up. The room, usually buzzing with side conversations, fell silent. Yes, she said, her voice steady and clear. I am leaving Frostmoon. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Cassian stared at her, uncomprehending. Leaving, he repeated, as if she'd spoken a foreign language. For how long? A diplomatic mission? Permanently, Lisa stated. A murmur rippled through the council members. Aluna did not simply leave, it was unprecedented. It was a severing of the mate bond, a public declaration of a pack's fracture. You can't be serious, Elena scoffed, leaning forward. You can't just abandon your duties. Lisa turned her gaze to Elena. It wasn't angry, it was entirely devoid of emotion. My duties are complete. The pack is secure. I leave the rest in your capable hands, Beta Elena. The subtle insult landed perfectly. Elena flushed, her jaw tightening. Cassian stood up, his imposing frame casting a long shadow. The alpha aura rolled off him, heavy and oppressive, a demand for submission. Lisa, enough of this performance. You are my Luna. You belong here. I belong to myself, Cassian, she replied, her voice cutting through his aura like a silver blade. The bond is broken. You broke it in the study. I am merely making it official. She didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked out of the council chamber. She didn't look back at the stunned faces of the elders, or at the sudden, dawning panic in Cassian's eyes. She walked out of the fortress, past the training grounds, past the bewildered guards, and headed toward the Whispering Pines. She carried nothing but the clothes on her back, and the letter from Ethelgard hidden in her pocket. She left Cassian a stable pack, a full treasury, and his mistress. She left him everything he thought he wanted. He didn't realize until much later that she had taken the soul of Frostmoon with her. The Whispering Pines earned their name. The wind didn't merely blow through the dense, dark needles, it sighed. It sounded like 1,000 voices sharing secrets just out of earshot. It was a place Frostmoon wolves avoided, a liminal space bordering the treacherous ascent into the Silver Mountains. Lisa stood at the edge of the tree line, the chill of the afternoon air biting through her cloak. She was entirely alone for the first time in 5 years. The constant hum of the pack bond, the collective anxiety, joy, and hunger of hundreds of wolves that usually thrummed in the back of her mind, was gone. She had severed it, a brutal tearing that left a phantom ache in her chest, hollow and echoing. She waited. The Ethelgard missive had been precise about the location, but vague on time. An hour passed. The sun began its slow descent, casting long skeletal shadows across the forest floor. A prickle of unease started to crawl up Lisa's spine. Had it been a trap? A cruel joke orchestrated by Elena to get her out of the territory? Then the shadows detached themselves from the trees. They were so silent. Lisa didn't realize she was surrounded until they stepped into the fading light. There were 4 of them, tall and impossibly lean. They didn't move like wolves, heavy and powerful. They moved like liquid smoke. They were dressed in dark leather and chainmail that gleamed with a dull, silver sheen. One stepped forward. He didn't wear a helm, revealing sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the color of old ice. "Luna Lisa," he spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in her teeth. "Just Lisa," she corrected, her voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline spiking in her veins. "The title no longer applies." The man inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledging a fact rather than showing respect. "I am Kalen, commander of the Ethelgard Vanguard. You are expected." He didn't offer a hand. He didn't ask if she was ready. He simply turned and walked into the dense pines, expecting her to follow. The journey was a blur of exhausting physical exertion and disorienting sensory input. They didn't stop for the night. They climbed. The terrain grew steeper, the air thinner and colder. The Ethelgard guards moved with an unnatural stamina, never panting, never stumbling. Lisa pushed herself to the absolute limit, refusing to ask for a rest. She was fueled by a cold, spiteful energy. Cassian thought her weak. She would prove him wrong, even if it was only to these silent strangers. By dawn, they crested a ridge, and the world fell away. Below them lay a valley hidden within the peaks, a sprawling expanse of emerald green, impossibly untouched by the snow that choked the surrounding mountains. In the center of the valley sat a city of pale stone and shimmering glass, its spires reaching for the sky like grasping fingers. It wasn't a fortress like Frostmoon. It was a work of art, beautiful and terribly imposing. "Ethelgard," Kalen announced, the only word he had spoken since the pines. As they descended into the valley, the air changed. It was warmer, heavily perfumed with blooming flowers, and it hummed. It was a vibration Lisa could feel in the marrow of her bones, an ancient thrumming power that made the shifter magic in her blood feel thin and new. They were led through wide, immaculate streets lined with people who paused to watch them pass. They didn't stare with the open curiosity or veiled hostility of a wolf pack. They observed her with an unsettling, ancient calm. Kalen brought her to the central palace, a massive structure carved directly into the side of the mountain. The doors, made of dark, unyielding wood, opened silently as they approached. "The queen awaits," Kalen said, stepping aside. Lisa took a deep breath, smoothing her dusty cloak. She had faced hostile alphas and cunning merchants. She could face a mythical queen. She walked through the doors alone. The throne room was cavernous, lit by glowing crystals embedded in the high ceiling. At the far end, on a dais of polished obsidian, sat a woman. She wasn't old, yet she looked as though she had seen centuries. Her hair was a waterfall of stark white, her eyes a startling, luminous violet. She didn't wear a crown. Her presence was sovereign enough. "Lisa of Frostmoon." The queen's voice resonated through the hall, clear as a bell. "You severed your bond. You walked away from a king." "I walked away from a lie, Your Majesty," Lisa replied, keeping her chin high. The queen's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Good. We have no use for lies here, nor do we have use for the weak." She leaned forward, the violet eyes piercing through Lisa's carefully constructed defenses. "Tell me, Lisa, what do you do when the foundation you built your life upon turns out to be sand?" "You find solid rock," Lisa answered without hesitation. "And you build again." The queen nodded slowly. "Then let us see what kind of stone you are made of." The first month in Ethelgard was not a sanctuary. It was a crucible. Lisa wasn't treated as a guest, nor was she treated as a prisoner. She was treated as an initiate. The queen, whose name Lisa learned was Seraphina, offered no explanations for the summons. She simply demanded excellence. Lisa was assigned quarters, austere but comfortable, and given a grueling schedule. Her mornings were spent in the grand library, a dizzying labyrinth of ancient texts and glowing scrolls. She was forced to learn the history of Ethelgard, a history that predated the shifter packs by millennia. She learned of the ancient magic that sustained the hidden valley, a magic tied to the earth and the stars, far more complex than the instinctual shifting of wolves. Her afternoons were worse. She was handed over to Kalen, the stoic commander, for physical training. "You rely on your wolf," Kalen observed on her first day in the training ring, his pale eyes assessing her stance. "Your human form is an afterthought, a vessel." "I am a shifter," Lisa snapped, out of breath and bruised after only 10 minutes of sparring. "The wolf is my strength." "The wolf is a tool," Kalen corrected, easily deflecting her clumsy strike. "If you lose the tool, what are you?" He swept her legs out from under her, sending her crashing to the dust. "Right now, you are nothing." It was brutal, humiliating work. Cassian had never expected her to fight. He was the warrior. Her battlefield was the negotiation table. But Kalen didn't care about trade routes. He cared about leverage, balance, and the deadly application of force. Lisa hated him, but she refused to quit. Every time she fell, she imagined Elena's smug face in the council room. Every time her muscles screamed, she heard Cassian's dismissive tone. "You know your place." She would drag herself back to her feet, spitting dust, and attack again. Slowly, agonizingly, she changed. The soft curves she had maintained as Luna hardened into lean muscle. Her movements, once deliberate and graceful, became sharp and efficient. She learned to fight not with brute strength, which she lacked against the Ethel Guardians, but with speed and vicious precision. And she began to understand the library's texts. The Ethel Guardians were not shifters, but they were deeply connected to the land's raw magic. Serafina began calling Lisa into her private study in the evenings, testing her comprehension. "The Frost Moon Pack believes power comes from dominance," Serafina said one evening, pouring a fragrant, steaming liquid from a silver pitcher. "They believe the alpha, who shouts the loudest and bites the hardest, is the strongest. It's how we survive," Lisa said, accepting the cup. "The border is unforgiving." "Survival is not rulership," Serafina countered softly. "Rulership is understanding the intricate web of consequence. It is the ability to foresee the avalanche from the falling pebble." She looked intently at Lisa. "You managed the logistics of Frost Moon, Lisa. You kept them fed. You kept them wealthy. Yet, Cassian believes he built the pack. He led the armies," Lisa murmured, a familiar bitterness rising. "Armies march on their stomachs," Serafina noted dryly. "Tell me, what happens to Frost Moon now that the mind behind the logistics is gone?" Lisa paused, the tea turning cold in her hands. She had been so focused on her own survival, she hadn't considered the long-term impact of her sudden departure. She had left things in order, yes, but order requires maintenance. Elena was brilliant at tactics, at manipulating people. But she had no patience for ledgers, for the slow, boring work of diplomacy. Cassian was decisive in battle, but impulsive in peace. "They will struggle," Lisa admitted slowly. "The trade agreements with the Southern Covens require constant renegotiation. The border patrols need coordinated supply lines." "And when the winter comes?" Serafina prompted. "They will be vulnerable," Lisa said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. She hadn't just left them. She had inadvertently sabotaged them. Serafina smiled, a chilling expression. "Precisely. Power is not always a roar, Lisa. Sometimes it is the silence left behind when you take your hands off the wheel." The Queen stood, walking to the balcony that overlooked the glowing city. "You were a good Luna, Lisa. But a Luna is merely a moon, reflecting the Alpha's light. It is time you learned to burn like a sun." Winter arrived in Frost Moon not with a gentle snowfall, but with a howling, bitter gale that tore the remaining leaves from the oaks and froze the rivers overnight. Inside the royal study, the atmosphere was equally frigid. Elena slammed a leather-bound ledger onto the mahogany desk. A pot of ink rattled dangerously near the edge. "This is absurd," she hissed, her auburn hair falling out of its usually perfect braid. "The Southern Covens are demanding triple the usual tariff for the winter grain shipments." "Triple, Cassian." Cassian rubbed his temples, a dull ache throbbing behind his eyes. He hadn't slept properly in weeks. The study, once a place of quiet strategy when Lisa sat across from him, now felt like a cage. "And what did you offer them in return?" "I told their envoy that if they tried to extort the Alpha King, I would lead a patrol across their borders and take the grain by force," Elena declared, her chest heaving with indignation. "They need to respect our strength." Cassian stared at her, the exhaustion settling deep into his bones. "Elena, you cannot threaten a trade partner with war when our silos are half empty and the snow is already 3 feet deep." "They insulted us," she snapped back, her eyes flashing gold with her wolf's rising temper. "Lisa let them walk all over us with her endless compromises. I won't." "Lisa kept us fed," Cassian said. The words slipped out before he could stop them, heavy and raw in the silent room. Elena froze. The defiance in her posture morphed into something sharper, something bruised. "Then perhaps you should have sent me away and kept your precious administrator." She didn't wait for his reply. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the study, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind her. Cassian leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The physical intimacy he shared with Elena, the fire and passion that had drawn him away from his marriage, was entirely useless when the pack was freezing. He had wanted a warrior beside him. He hadn't realized that wars were won in ledgers and grain shipments long before the first blood was shed. Frost Moon was fracturing, and the cold was seeping in. Hundreds of miles away, high in the protected, sunlit valley of Ethelgard, Lisa was sweating. She parried a vicious downward strike from Kaelin, the impact vibrating up her arms. She didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped into his guard, using the momentum of his heavy swing against him. She hooked her ankle behind his knee and drove the hilt of her training sword into his solar plexus. Kaelin hit the dusty floor of the training ring with a heavy thud. Lisa stood over him, the point of her wooden blade resting gently against his throat. She was panting, a bruised cut on her cheek bleeding freely, but her hand was remarkably steady. For a long moment, the commander stared up at her, his pale eyes wide with surprise. Then, slowly, the corners of his mouth twitched upward. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. "Yield," he rasped, tapping the ground twice. Lisa stepped back, lowering her sword. She didn't gloat. The victory felt clinical, a mathematical equation of leverage and timing, finally solved. "Impressive," a voice echoed from the shadowed archway of the arena. Queen Seraphina stepped into the light, leaning slightly on a silver-tipped cane. She looked frailer today, the luminous violet of her eyes dimmed by an invisible exhaustion. "She is ready, Your Majesty," Kaelin said, rising smoothly to his feet and bowing his head. "Ready for what?" Lisa asked, wiping the blood from her cheek with the back of her hand. Seraphina gestured for Lisa to follow her. They walked in silence through the hanging gardens, the scent of night-blooming jasmine catching on the breeze. It no longer reminded Lisa of betrayal. It just smelled like flowers. "Ethelgard is ancient, Lisa," Seraphina began, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. "But ancient things eventually crumble if they do not adapt. The magic of this valley is tied to the earth, but it requires a tether to the mortal realm to remain stable. A ruler." "You are the ruler," Lisa pointed out. "I am a ghost, holding onto the physical world through sheer stubbornness," Seraphina corrected with a dry chuckle. "My time is ending." The magic needs a new vessel, someone forged in the brutal reality of the outside world, but possessing the intellect to wield ancient power without being consumed by it. Lisa stopped walking. The magnitude of the Queen's words settled over her like a heavy cloak. You summoned me here to replace you. I summoned you because you carry a dormant spark of Ethelgardian blood, Seraphina revealed, turning to face her. Your great-grandmother was exiled from these mountains. But blood alone is not enough. You had to prove your spirit. You had to prove you could rebuild from ash. The Queen stepped closer, her gaze piercing. Tonight, the celestial alignment reaches its apex. The crucible of stars will open. You will step inside, and you will either emerge as Queen, or you will not emerge at all. The cavern deep beneath the palace hummed with an agonizing frequency. It felt as though the very air was vibrating, charged with a heavy metallic ozone that tasted like a thunderstorm. In the center of the cavern lay a circular pool of liquid silver, glowing with an ethereal, blinding light. The crucible of stars. Lisa stood at the edge, dressed in a simple white linen tunic. She was entirely alone. Seraphina and Kaelin had escorted her to the heavy stone doors, but ancient law dictated the initiate must cross the threshold without aid. You will feel as though you are being unmade, Seraphina had warned her, her frail hand resting on Lisa's cheek. The magic will search your soul for weakness, for lingering attachments to your past. If it finds you anchored to your pain, it will drown you. You must let it all go. Lisa closed her eyes. She thought of Cassian's amber eyes in the study, clouded with guilt. She thought of Elena's smug smile in the council room. The betrayal still burned, a dark, localized knot in her chest. She took a breath, opened her eyes, and stepped into the silver pool. The pain was immediate and absolute. It wasn't physical. It was a tearing of the mind. The liquid silver crawled up her legs, sinking through her skin and into her veins, like liquid ice. A cacophony of voices erupted in her head. She heard the howling of the frost moon pack, the frantic scratching of a quill on ledger paper, Cassian's voice whispering. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. The magic was trying to pull her backward into her trauma. It amplified her feelings of worthlessness, the humiliation of being replaced, the phantom ache of the severed mate bond. The silver reached her chest, tightening like a vice. She couldn't breathe. She was sinking. You are nothing without the pack. A voice hissed in the dark recesses of her mind, sounding remarkably like Elena. You are weak. You know your place. Lisa gasped, fighting the paralyzing cold. She forced herself to look at the memories, not with sorrow, but with cold, analytical detachment. Cassian's betrayal hadn't broken her. It had freed her from a man too small to see her true worth. Elena's treachery hadn't destroyed her. It had excised a toxic tumor from her life. She was not a victim of Frost Moon. She was its architect, and she had simply moved on to build a greater monument. I am the foundation, Lisa whispered through gritted teeth, her voice echoing in the cavern. I am the rock. The localized knot of pain in her chest, the lingering resentment, shattered. Suddenly, the excruciating cold shifted. The silver liquid ignited, turning from ice to a radiant, pulsing warmth. It surged up into her throat, behind her eyes, filling the hollow spaces left by her shattered past. She felt the valley above her, the roots of the ancient pines, the veins of ore in the mountains, the quiet breathing of the city. She was connected to all of it. When Lisa finally waded out of the pool, she did not collapse. She stood tall, water cascading from her skin, but it dried instantly, leaving a faint, shimmering residue. She walked toward the heavy stone doors and pushed them open. They swung wide without a sound. Serafina and Kaelin were waiting. As Lisa stepped into the torchlight, Kaelin immediately dropped to one knee, bowing his head in absolute submission. Serafina smiled, tears glistening in her violet eyes. She looked at Lisa, really looked at her. The exhaustion was gone from Lisa's face, replaced by an ageless, terrifying calm. And when Lisa blinked, her dark eyes flashed with a rim of luminous starlight violet. "Long live the Queen," Serafina breathed, bowing her head. 3 weeks later, the situation in Frostmoon had escalated from dire to catastrophic. A blizzard had raged for 5 days straight, trapping the pack in the fortress. The lower village was buried in snow, and the remaining grain stores had been contaminated by a sudden, unnatural dampness. Cassian stood before the roaring fireplace in the great hall, addressing the panicked council of elders. Elena sat rigidly beside him, her face pale, the fire gone from her eyes. The pack was starving, and her combat skills were useless against the weather. "The southern covens will not answer our ravens," an elder rasped, his voice trembling. "The western passes are blocked. Alpha, we have enough rations for 10 days. After that, the pups and the elderly will begin to freeze." Cassian gripped the mantle, his knuckles white. The weight of his crown had never felt heavier. He had spent his reign focusing on military might, expanding borders, winning skirmishes. He had never realized how delicately balanced the survival of a pack truly was until the fulcrum had walked away. "There is one option," Cassian said slowly, turning to face the council. The room fell dead silent. "Ethelgard," murmurs of disbelief broke out. "Ethelgard is a myth," one elder protested. "Even if it exists, they despise shifters. They will not help us." "We have reports from the shadow patrols," Cassian countered, his voice booming over the dissent. "They say Ethelgard has a new ruler, a queen who is expanding their trade networks into the mortal realms. They have magic that can yield harvests in the dead of winter." "What could we possibly offer them?" Elena asked, her voice small. "Anything they ask," Cassian replied grimly. "We will pack a tribute of our finest furs, silver ore, and ancient relics. I will travel to the Whispering Pines myself with an envoy. We will beg for an audience." He looked around the desperate faces of his people, his heart heavy with dread and a strange, twisting irony. He was marching into the Whispering Pines to beg a mythical queen for salvation, entirely unaware that the savior he sought was the woman he had discarded. The trek through the Whispering Pines was not a journey. It was a slow, agonizing descent into humiliation. Cassian led the small envoy of Frostmoon's finest, but they looked nothing like a royal guard. They were a ragged procession of freezing, starving wolves pushing against a blizzard that felt almost sentient in its cruelty. Ice clung to Cassian's dark beard, and his usually powerful strides were reduced to a heavy, dragging trudge. Behind him, Elena stumbled. She was bundled in the thickest direwolf furs the pack possessed, but her lips were tinted a terrifying shade of blue. She had insisted on coming, driven by a frantic need to secure her position. If Cassian negotiated a miracle without her, her precarious hold on the pack's respect would vanish entirely. "Alpha," one of the guards rasped, his voice barely carrying over the howling wind. "We cannot survive another night in this." Cassian gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw aching with cold. He wanted to roar, to demand the storm yield to his alpha command, but the wind only shrieked louder, mocking his impotence. He was a king of wolves, but here, in the shadow of the Silver Mountains, he was just another dying animal. "Keep moving," Cassian ordered, his voice cracking. "The maps say the border is—" "You are already past it," the voice didn't shout over the wind. It sliced right through it, low and impossibly clear. Cassian reached for the heavy broadsword strapped to his back, but his frozen fingers fumbled. Out of the swirling whiteout, figures materialized. They didn't crunch through the snow. They seemed to glide over it. 5 warriors clad in dark, shimmering leather and chainmail surrounded the Frost Moon envoy. At their head stood a tall man with eyes like glacial ice. Kalen. "State your business, shifters," Kalen commanded, resting a casual hand on the pommel of a curved blade. He looked entirely unaffected by the sub-zero temperatures. Cassian forced himself to stand taller, projecting whatever scraps of alpha authority he had left. "I am Cassian, Alpha King of Frostmoon. I have come to seek an audience with the Queen of Ethelgard. We bring tribute." He gestured stiffly to the 2 exhausted pack horses, carrying chests of silver ore and ancient relics. Kalen glanced at the chests, his expression thoroughly bored. "Ethelgard has no need of mortal trinkets. Turn back, King of Frostmoon. Your kind brings only noise and fleas." Elena pushed past one of her own guards, her desperation overriding her exhaustion. "You must let us through. Our pack is starving. The southern passes are blocked. We are prepared to offer anything." Kalen's pale eyes slowly slid to Elena, assessing her with a cold, clinical detachment that made her shrink back. He lingered for a moment, as if recognizing something pathetic in her frantic posture. "Anything," Kalen repeated softly. The corner of his mouth twitched in a mirthless half-smile. "Very well. Follow me. If you fall behind, you will be left to freeze." The Ethelgard vanguard turned and moved into the storm. Cassian and his envoy had to break into a grueling jog just to keep their dark silhouettes in sight. When they finally crested the hidden ridge, the blizzard abruptly stopped. It was as if they had walked through an invisible wall. Cassian gasped, dropping to his knees on the lush emerald grass. The air was warm, smelling of ozone and blooming jasmine. Below them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, was a city of impossible beauty. Spire after spire of pale stone and shimmering glass reached toward the heavens, interwoven with ancient, massive trees. He looked down at his own hands, filthy and trembling, then back at the city. For the first time in his life, Cassian felt remarkably, terrifyingly small. He had spent his reign conquering minor pacts and border territories, believing he was shaping the world. He realized now he had only been playing in the dirt. They were escorted down into the valley, walking through wide, immaculate streets. The citizens of Ethelgard paused to watch them, their faces serene and untroubled. There was no fear in their eyes, only a quiet, unnerving pity. Elena kept her head down, deeply conscious of the stench of wet fur and desperation that clung to them. Kalen led them to the imposing central palace, marching them up a flight of obsidian stairs that gleamed like dark mirrors. "Leave your weapons," Kalen ordered as they reached the massive wooden doors. Cassian hesitated. An alpha never disarmed. It was a sign of ultimate submission. He looked at Kalen's impassive face, then at the freezing guards behind him. With a heavy heart, Cassian unbuckled his broadsword and let it clatter onto the stone. "The queen is waiting," Kalen said. The massive doors swung inward, revealing a cavernous hall bathed in a soft, ethereal light. Cassian took a deep breath, steeling himself to beg. The throne room was breathtaking, designed not to intimidate with weapons or grim banners, but with sheer, overwhelming architectural mastery. Glowing crystals were embedded in the vaulted ceiling, mimicking a star-filled night sky, casting a cool, luminescent glow over the polished obsidian floor. At the far end of the hall sat a throne carved from a single piece of moonstone. A figure was seated upon it, partially obscured by the cascading light from the crystals above. Cassian walked forward, the heavy silence of the room pressing down on him. Every footstep felt like a thunderclap. Elena walked closely beside him, practically hiding in his shadow, her previous bravado entirely evaporated. They stopped 10 paces from the dais. Cassian forced his knees to bend, dropping into a deep, formal bow. It burned his pride to do it, but the survival of Frostmoon depended on this single moment. Elena hastily followed suit, dropping to her knees. "Your Majesty," Cassian began, his voice echoing off the ancient stone. He pitched it to be commanding, yet respectful. "I am Cassian of Frostmoon. We have traveled through the bitterest winter in a century to seek your grace. Our lands are frozen, our silos compromised. We ask for trade. We ask for salvation." For a long moment, there was only silence. It stretched, taut and agonizing. Then, the figure on the throne leaned forward. "Salvation, Cassian." The voice was a velvet strike to the chest. It was calm, resonant, and entirely stripped of the warmth he remembered. Cassian's head snapped up. His heart hammered wildly against his ribs, skipping a frantic beat. He blinked, struggling against the luminescent glow of the room, his wolf instincts screaming in confusion. The queen stood, picking up a silver-tipped cane, and descended the first 3 steps of the dais, stepping fully into the light. Elena let out a sharp, strangled gasp, clapping a hand over her mouth. Cassian stopped breathing altogether. She wore a gown of deep, midnight blue silk that seemed to absorb the light around it. A crown of woven silver branches rested upon her dark hair. But it was her face that halted time. It was Lisa. Yet, it was not the woman he had discarded. The soft, accommodating Luna was gone. The woman before him radiated a terrifying, ancient power. Her dark eyes, once filled with quiet devotion for him, now flashed with a rim of starlight violet. "Lisa?" Cassian whispered, the words stumbling awkwardly from his lips. He pushed himself halfway up, a confused, desperate smile breaking across his face. "Lisa, thank the goddess. It's you. You're here." He took a step forward, the instinct to claim, to pull his mate into his arms, overriding all logic. "Halt!" Kaelin's voice cracked like a whip. A dozen Ethelgard guards materialized from the shadows, their hands resting on their hilts. Lisa didn't even flinch. She raised a single, graceful hand, and the guards instantly stilled. She looked at Cassian, not with anger, but with the cold, analytical detachment of a scholar observing a remarkably dull insect. "You forget yourself, Alpha," Lisa said, her voice carrying an unnatural, resonant echo. "The woman you knew died in your study. You addressed the Queen of Ethelgard." Cassian's smile fractured. The sheer weight of her presence, the magical aura rolling off her, pushed against his chest, forcing him to plant his feet just to remain upright. I don't understand. How? You are a shifter. You are my... I am nothing to you," Lisa interrupted, the absolute finality in her tone cutting him to the bone. "I am the tether to this valley. I am the earth and the stars, and you are a beggar in my hall." Elena, trembling violently, tried to find her voice. "Lisa, please. It's me. It's Elena. We made a mistake, all right? We're sorry. But there are pups freezing to death. You used to care about them." Lisa's violet-rimmed eyes shifted to Elena. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I remember you, Elena," Lisa said softly. "I remember the scent of jasmine in places it did not belong. I remember the smug curl of your lip when you thought you had stolen a kingdom." Lisa took another step down the dais. "You wanted to be the Alpha's right hand. You wanted the power without the sacrifice. Tell me, Beta, how is your tactical genius faring against the snow? Can you stab the frostbite? Can you manipulate a blizzard?" Elena burst into tears, shrinking back, thoroughly broken by the calm, devastating truth of Lisa's words. Cassian felt a sickening wave of nausea. He was watching the power dynamic of his entire life invert in seconds. He had thought Lisa weak because she didn't fight with claws. Now, she was destroying them with mere words. "Lisa, please," Cassian begged, abandoning his pride entirely. His voice broke. "I was a fool. I was blind. But do not punish the pack for my sins. They are innocent." Lisa reached the bottom of the steps. She stopped just a few feet away from him, her posture perfect, her face an unreadable mask. "I do not punish, Cassian," Lisa stated, her gaze piercing right through him. "I rule, and I understand the web of consequence. You built your reign on dominance, believing it made you invincible. You are starving because you failed to respect the foundation that held you up." She turned slightly, looking back toward Kaelin. "We will not let Frostmoon starve," Lisa announced, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Cassian let out a shaky breath of relief, but it died in his throat as Lisa turned back to him, her eyes hardening into chips of violet ice. "But Ethelgard does not give charity," Lisa continued. "I will provide grain. I will provide magic to thaw your soil. In exchange, Frostmoon will no longer be an independent kingdom." Cassian froze, his blood running cold. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," Lisa whispered, leaning in just close enough for him to catch the faint, terrifying scent of ozone and starlight, "that Frostmoon will become a vassal territory of Ethelgard. You will dissolve your council. You will pay a tithe of your warriors to my vanguard. And you, Cassian, will kneel and swear fealty to me." She straightened up, the absolute monarch. "That is my price. Pay it, or go home and watch your legacy freeze." The silence in the cavernous throne room was absolute, heavy and suffocating. It pressed against Cassian's eardrums, a physical weight that mirrored the crushing reality of Lisa's demand. Swear fealty. The words echoed in his mind, rejecting all logic. He was an Alpha King. His bloodline had ruled the northern territories for 10 generations. His wolf, a massive, prideful beast, clawed frantically at the inside of his mind, snarling against the very concept of submission. An Alpha did not kneel. An Alpha fought until his heart stopped beating. But as Cassian looked at the woman standing before him, the frantic snarling of his wolf quieted into a terrified whimper. Lisa did not exude the aggressive, volatile dominance of a rival Alpha. Her power was entirely different. It was the terrifying, quiet immensity of the ocean, the unyielding permanence of a mountain. The magical aura radiating from her skin smelled of ozone and ancient earth, a force so primordial it made Cassian's shifter magic feel like a flickering candle in a hurricane. He looked down at Elena. The fiery, combative beta who had promised him strength was curled into a pathetic ball on the polished obsidian floor, shivering uncontrollably. She wouldn't even meet his eye. In the face of true, absolute power, all of Elena's cunning and bravado had evaporated. Cassian realized, with a sickening jolt of clarity, that he had traded a diamond for a handful of cheap glass. He had been blinded by ego, mistaking Elena's ruthless ambition for strength, and Lisa's quiet diplomacy for weakness. "The Pack Council?" Cassian rasped, his throat bone dry. He tried to sound like a king, but his voice was thin, desperate. "They are proud. They will not accept vassalage to an outside kingdom. They will fight." Lisa's expression did not change. She looked at him with the detached patience of a master explaining a simple concept to a slow pupil. "Let them fight the snow, then," Lisa replied smoothly. "Let them fight the frostbite creeping up their children's limbs. I do not negotiate with dying men, Cassian. pride is a luxury of the fed. Your people are starving. If your council chooses pride over survival, they are not leaders. They are executioners. She turned her back to him. A deliberate, calculated display of vulnerability that screamed of absolute confidence. She walked slowly up the dais, her midnight blue gown gliding over the stone. I have commanded the vanguard to load 50 wagons of grain and cured meats, Lisa said, not looking back. I have bound 3 Ethelgardian spell weavers to the convoy to thaw your valleys and cleanse your blighted silos. The relief effort is ready to march. Cassian's breath hitched. You already prepared the wagons? Lisa reached the moonstone throne and turned to face him, the starlight crystals above catching the silver branches of her crown. Logistics, Cassian, she said softly, the echo of her old life bleeding into the authority of her new one. It was always my battlefield. I knew the mathematical certainty of your failure the moment you let the southern covens block the passes. I knew you would come here, and I knew you would have no choice but to say yes. She sat down, resting her hands on the carved armrests. The wagons leave in 10 minutes, with or without you. Make your choice. Cassian stood paralyzed. He thought of the pups huddled in the great hall, their cries echoing in the freezing dark. He thought of the elders, their faces gaunt, looking to him for a salvation he could not provide on his own. He had built his reign on dominance. But dominance was an illusion. True leadership was sacrifice. Cassian closed his eyes. The image of the proud frost moon banner snapping in the wind flashed through his mind, followed immediately by the image of a child freezing in the snow. He opened his eyes. He looked at Lisa, the woman he had broken, the woman who had reforged herself into a god. Slowly, agonizingly, Cassian's right knee buckled. It hit the polished obsidian floor with a hollow thud. Elena gasped, a ragged, wet sound from the floor beside him. Kaelin, standing in the shadows, did not move a muscle. Cassian gritted his teeth, his jaw trembling as he fought against every instinct in his body. Then he lowered his left knee. He was fully on the ground, dwarfed by the sheer scale of the throne room. He placed his hands flat on the cold stone and lowered his head, exposing the nape of his neck, the ultimate surrender of a wolf. I, Cassian of Frostmoon, he began, his voice breaking, tears of humiliation and bitter regret stinging his eyes. Do hereby surrender my crown. I pledge the loyalty of my pack, the strength of my warriors, and the breath in my lungs to the Queen of Ethelgard. From this day until my last, we are your shield, and you are our sovereign. The words hung in the air, a permanent shift in the world's balance. For a long moment, the only sound was Elena's quiet sobbing. Then, Lisa stood. Ethelgard recognizes the oath of Frostmoon. Lisa's voice rang out, imbued with a magical resonance that seemed to seal the words into the very stone of the palace. Rise, Alpha of the northern vassals. Cassian pushed himself up, his body feeling impossibly heavy. He didn't feel like an alpha anymore. He felt like a ghost. And me? The whisper came from the floor. Elena pushed herself up on trembling arms, her face smeared with tears and dust. She looked up at Lisa, a desperate, pathetic hope in her eyes. Lisa, Your Majesty, I can serve. I know Frostmoon's secrets. I can be of use to you. Cassian looked at Elena with utter disgust. Even now, she was trying to climb over him to survive. Lisa's violet eyes drifted down to Elena. There was no anger in them. There wasn't even pity. There was only a cold, terrifying apathy. You are a citizen of a vassal territory, Elena, Lisa said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Your fate is the concern of your alpha. You are beneath my notice. Elena collapsed back onto the floor, weeping openly, entirely shattered by the realization that she wasn't even worth the Queen's revenge. "Kaelin," Lisa commanded. "My queen," the commander replied, stepping instantly into the light. "Escort the Alpha and his companion to the convoy. Ensure they survive the journey home. They have much work to do." Lisa turned her gaze back to Cassian one last time. The soft, loving Luna he once knew was completely erased, replaced by a ruler forged in starlight and stone. "Go home, Cassian," she said quietly, "and rebuild your pack on rock, not sand." Cassian bowed his head one final time. He turned and walked out of the throne room, following the silent commander into the warm, perfumed air of the valley, leaving the only woman he had ever truly loved sitting on a throne he could never reach. And so, the Alpha King who thought he held the world in his hands learned the most devastating lesson of all. True power is never loud, and true loyalty cannot be taken for granted. In his arrogant pursuit of fire and passion, he discarded the very foundation that kept his kingdom standing. Lisa's journey from a discarded, heartbroken Luna to the undisputed queen of the most ancient realm proves that when you strip away a woman's reliance on others, you might just uncover a force of nature that can bring a king to his knees. If you were captivated by Lisa's incredible journey of betrayal, empowerment, and ultimate vindication, please like this story, share it with your fellow fiction lovers, and subscribe for more dramatic, high-stakes romance tales. Let us know in the comments below. Do you think Cassian got what he deserved?